Good morning. Welcome to Environmental Hazard and Safety Facility Mapping using Data-Driven Pages. My name is Kathy Cotney, and I'm the lead consultant for spatial analysis. And this project was completed by the Raleigh Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Department between 2013 and 2014. So why did the City of Raleigh decide to do this project? Well, as part of the North Carolina State Building Code, there's Fire Code. And that fire code spells out specific criteria for qualifying your facility for hazards. And if your facility meets those criteria, then site plans for those facilities is mandatory. They have to include the occupancy assembly points, the locations of the fire hydrants, and normal routes of the fire department vehicle access. A little bit of background about exactly what we're talking about when we say hazards. The National Fire Protection Association, otherwise known as the NFPA, has this little diamond you may have seen on buildings just anywhere. Restaurants, stores, all sorts of buildings have them if they store chemicals on site, if they have hazards. A pool, if you have a local pool, they probably store chlorine. And so this would be an example of when you might have seen this diamond. So the NFPA placard usually is comprised of four numbers, and red is for fire, yellow is instability, blue is health, and then there's a white portion to the diamond for specified hazards like corrosive, alkaline. There's several, and you can have multiple items in that white part of that diamond. If a facility has more than one EHS facility, then the highest number from each of those categories for all the buildings is adopted, and then a master hazard rating is assigned to the overall park. So early on in the project, we had to make some decisions about what was going to be mapped. We knew what had to be mapped. We had some attributes that were required, but we began to see that there was some customization needed, and by the time we were finished, over 80 different features were identified that the City of Raleigh felt like were relevant for this map, to give the map context, and also just for the fact that the information was necessary. This was a lot of information, and it was going to be put on top of a sophisticated base map that already was information rich. So as you can imagine, there were some mapping challenges. In addition to the data, we also had to consider the geography. This was not inconsiderable. So the City of Raleigh has a lot of facilities, and they're all very different. And so Pope House was one that is the smallest that we mapped, and it's just a house lot. It's just a really small little house lot in the middle of the city. It has an assembly point, as you can see down in the lower portion of the slide, has a fire hydrant, and then the red line is the fire truck access route. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we had Lake Johnson, which had 3 EHS facilities within the park. And that was before you considered the fact the park was enormous. It was very large. So our goal was to have one map per park, and as you can see, a size and scale for one was not necessarily going to work for the other. Some data challenges that we ran into outside of just the number of features that we decided to put on the map was that the data sometimes existed, sometimes it didn't. There was a lot of it. We needed to design a map that laid comfortably over the existing map. And then in some cases, some of the base map data and other feature classes that we sourced through NC Map and other ways too was too outdated for the EHS site mapping purposes. And then our final challenge was that some utility data did exist but was not available to us. And some special considerations, anytime you do a new project, you're going to have some learning curve. This had never been done before in the City of Raleigh. There was no existing map for reference, no EHS data specifications for the geodatabase, the feature classes that we created, and there were no graphic specifications for the map. That was all done for the first time. So why did I decide to go with data-driven pages? Well, one of the huge advantages was that it reduced the number of MXDs required. Anyone who's done a similar project of their own where they did a map series knows that you can start with a template, but if you had to do extensive customization to each map in your series, you would end up managing a large number of MXDs. And data-driven pages allowed us to significantly reduce that. Lots of options automatically change with data-driven pages, so limiting your symbols in the legend to just those in your current map extent, feature counts, those were all automated every time you rotated through to the next data frame, the next extent. Automatic locator update, that was a nice feature. The map color text was better controlled and changed through dynamic text. So this was a really good fit for this project. So one of the ways we addressed the geography challenge, after we looked at every park, we decided that really we needed a custom scale and rotation for every park. That was the only way we were going to get the level of detail that we wanted and make it as user-friendly as we could. So the benefit was by doing it this way, it was database driven and we were able to choose the best scale for each situation. Another thing we did was we opted to go with a large scale map. The original scope was for 8 by 10 maps, and after we assembled all this information and put it on the map, we realized really quickly that wasn't really going to be functional. So we made it 24 by 36, which is architectural size D. That was much, much better in the majority of situations. We didn't want to go too large because we still needed something that was functional. If someone had a situation and emergency responders were out there, we wanted something that they could roll up and carry and work with very easily. We were still trying to get every park on a single map. So one of the ways we dealt with the amount of information that we were putting on these maps was to organize it, and these maps ended up with 7 legends. This was really one of the only ways to just keep it from being too complicated for the map user. If you're primarily interested in the stormwater data, it was very easy to locate where the stormwater data lived in the map column, in the legend. Also, if we had had a static legend that had every single possible feature there, this would not have even fit on a 24 by 36 map. So one of the key things to making this organization work was to reduce the number of symbols in the legend to only those that existed on the map. So checking that option in the properties layer was very important. Another way we addressed the large amount of information was using conventional symbology, trying to prevent the map user from having to constantly reference the legend by using conventional symbols and industry symbols, standards, and then tweaking those to fit our map so that when you're looking at the basketball court, you see a basketball and you know that that's what that is without having to necessarily read the base map legend. Parking, restroom facilities, shelters, in addition to other symbols that were more industry, utility specific or industry specific. These we felt would reduce the amount of time map user had to actually reference the legend. And we had initially, had the question of how are we going to design a map on top of a map. And in the end, this actually ended up being a non-issue because the current City of Raleigh base map's just very nice. It sits quietly under the other features. Sometimes due to the coloration, we employed halos to lift our symbols out of the map just a little bit, give them a little more distinction so they our colors and the colors of the base map didn't blend too much together. But overall, that ended up being a non-issue. And then we also had to address the data that existed that needed to be updated, and then some of the data that didn't exist. To manage the points that we were putting on the map, ultimately I created a points of interest layer that was specific to these maps. And I used a variety of data analysis techniques to derive those features as much as possible from other source layers. So an example would be that Wake County parcels, using the APA activity codes, I extracted points. There's a points of interest layer you can get off NC OneMap. I use that to extract points. And then the EMS, fire, and law enforcement layers also from NC OneMap. I used those. And then the City of Raleigh base map had a lot of features, but they were polygons. So creating centroids and then importing those. So loaded all those into a single point of interest layer to make it more manageable. And then park by park, we edited, validated, and attributed data as needed to get everything current. This is just an example of where the base map data, which is lovely, but it was just a little bit too out of date. Parks and Recs, they just build things constantly. So this is an example of where there was a facility that was just completely missing. And we just edited the base map data and then provided that back to the city in this instance. And then the utility data that existed but was not available. Had thought, because of the purpose of these maps, EHS and emergency responders, needing to know where your gas lines is really, really important, and had thought we would be able to work with SCANA to get those service lines. And that ended up being not possible. They just don't give it out to anybody under any circumstances. So ultimately, that was disappointing. We hope maybe that'll change and these can be included in future editions of the map. So bang ahead here. I didn't opt for the graphic that said abandon all hope, all ye who enter. So anyway, it's possible. It's just not possible right now. That's what I feel like. And our final product was 6 MXDs instead of 50. So what you're looking at now is a standard map. This is a standard template for a EHS facility. We had a second template for the facilities that were non-EHS, and the only thing that's missing off of those is that the EHS legend in the lower right hand corner and the master facility rating diamond are missing off of that template. And using data-driven pages, we were able to generate both types of map, and essentially they are the same design. We did have some specific circumstances where this was still not a size that would work. So without changing the size of the map, we opted to do inset maps, and so took the EHS facility template that we were using with data-driven pages and then saved that and customized it to where we had some insets. And I have a template for 2 insets and a template for 3 insets. This is an example of the 3 inset map, and this is Pullen Park. The top inset is around the theater and arts center area. The middle one is around the aquatic center, and then the lower one's around amusements. This gave us the level of detail we needed for each of these areas. And then we have an overview map in the left-hand side that gives you the context with the quarter-mile boundary in the city. And of course, for the new feature classes that were created, which were only 2, fire truck route and the point feature class, we did complete metadata, FGDC compliant metadata. So overall, it was a smooth project. There are always lessons learned, even with smooth projects, and one was that bigger is better in most cases, but you still want to keep it as small as possible, make it functional. Another one was that gas lines, stormwater BMPs, wetlands, this type of data doesn't always exist in a GIS format. City of Raleigh has a pretty sophisticated GIS, and stormwater BMPs and wetlands were not a part of the database that we got. Gas lines we couldn't obtain through SCANA. So it might be better if you are attempting to do this type of site plan map to either have them surveyed, which in this particular project there was no budget to do any kind of GPR for like gas lines, but you could also digitize them from as-built. So that would be an approach to putting those lines and those points on the map. Another big lesson is that quick completion is best. That's sort of always a good idea, but in this case, the city builds new facilities and changes their facilities so rapidly that if you want your maps to be completed without having to revisit that phase where you update the base map data, you really want to get the mapping phase completed quickly. Otherwise, you're going to unavoidably have to go back and re-review every park to be sure that nothing has changed, so that they're all current. And so it was a wonderful project. I enjoyed working with the City of Raleigh staff. Kathy Capps, I'm pea green with envy. She is on a Caribbean cruise, which is why she could not be there today. But she has let me know to tell you all that if you have any questions about this type of map, why they did the project, how they did the project, their experience, you're welcome to contact her. And of course, if you have any questions about the data-driven pages or the approach to how we mapped it, you're always welcome to drop me a line at Kathy@spatialanalysisinc.com. And I thank you for attending.